Hey guys, Ben Pearson, the Roadster Tracker. As I'm recording this, about 50 years ago, John F. Kennedy, JFK, gave the most famous of his various Moonshot speeches, which was the speech that ignited really the public to pursue the moon as a goal. Now, there were actually two of them. One of them that was given in was September 12th of 1962. There was another one that was given before Congress in May of 1961, shortly after Alan Shepard's flight into space. And I wanted to talk about these two and to explain some of the events that were recorded in these and to just generally speaking, talk about how things were back in those days.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
This first one was before Congress, and in the backlight of finally having gotten a human into space, we were pretty close to actually beating the Russians to this goal, although our goalpost was far shorter than the Russians' goalpost was. We were going to just attempt a suborbital flight, and we had it well publicized. The Soviets decided to preempt us with this, and they launched a flight that circled the Earth basically an entire orbit. It was actually just past one orbit, although they landed in a different spot because of the rotation of the Earth. It's kind of a mess, but we were just going to send a person on a rocket that would take them into space and then a few minutes land, similar to the new Shepard missions that had been taking tourists into space recently. And although they crashed into the water and the rocket wasn't reusable and it went up higher, but it's the same general concept.
First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
So this was the original proposal to get funding to go to the moon. And note that there wasn't really any applause here. It was really a very strong concept. I mean, imagine this. We had one American and one Russian that had ever been into space at this point in time, and that was it. That was it. Just two people. And neither one of them had been in space for longer than an hour and a half. America had only been in space for a few minutes. And yet we're proposing to go to the moon, which is a much, much more challenging object. Now, getting into space is the hardest bit of that, but still, it is an extraordinarily difficult thing. And he was proposing to do this. As we know, the effort to get to the moon cost an enormous amount of money. It was costing a sizable part of the GDP of the entire country to be able to achieve that for much of the 60s. But we also know they were successful.
Together with $7 million already available, will accelerate development of the rover nuclear rocket. This gives promise of someday providing a means for even more exciting and ambitious exploration of space, perhaps beyond the moon, perhaps to the very end of the solar system itself.
This one caught my interest, and note that there was more applause for this than there was for the goal of the moon. The rover rocket engine is basically a predecessor to the Nerva engine. It is a nuclear-powered engine. Basically, in a nutshell, Nerva is a nuclear engine that will heat up gas, usually hydrogen, to a very, very high temperature and then exhaust it out. And all rocket engines essentially do that. By using the nuclear heat, you can heat it up to a higher temperature than you would with just chemical fuel. And as a result, it's a more efficient rocket engine, although it lacks some things. It no doubt will play a piece in the exploration of the solar system, something like that. Nerva has been long since dormant, but there are some various pieces of it, like the Vasmer mission, that come up periodically that I have no doubt Someday we will have a nuclear-powered engine that will let us get into deep space.
Third, an additional $50 million will make the most of our present leadership by accelerating the use of space satellites for worldwide communications. Fourth, an additional $75 million, of which $53 million is for the Weather Bureau, will help give us at the earliest possible time a satellite system for worldwide weather observation.
Now, these last two are interesting, proposing a communication satellite and a weather satellite. We'll talk a little bit more about these efforts, but this one revolutionized really everything far, far more than anything else we have. You may never go into space, you may never meet an astronaut, but odds are very, very good that you pull up a weather forecast or that you have called somebody in another country. It's even possible that you're listening to this via satellites that are communication satellites. This kind of technology has really, really made a huge difference to many people on Earth. And as a result of this, this was probably the largest impact for most people. And it's a relatively small amount of money, too. But we'll talk more when we get to the other speech.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal?
So this speech is the one that is the anniversary speech. JFK is presenting to Rice University, and odds are pretty good that if you think about the Moonshot speech, this is the one that you're thinking about. This is by far the most famous of the various addresses. The second most famous is the first one, and I do know that there were others, although they never really reached the same impact. During much of this that I'm going to not include, Kennedy basically compresses the entire span of human existence down to a matter of 50 years, I believe, and it's amazing just how many events happened really, really quickly in this time. If you think about it, as I'm recording this, 120 years ago, we hadn't even taken off in an airplane. And now it's super common. You can go fly anywhere in the world if you want to. No problem. That's been the case for years and years with a relatively low cost and a relatively quick speed. It is absolutely astounding how things have changed since the 1900s. And even before that time period, since the invention of the steam engine, really, as he mentions in this speech. A side note, I also enjoyed this speech because I had the opportunity to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings in the National Mall of Washington, D.C., and they put on a show where they really made this speech come to life. And I'll try and remember to leave a link in the description below. Unfortunately, it won't do justice to seeing the show in person, but it's still pretty neat to watch, even just through the recordings. But you can see this thing on the Washington Monument, which is just absolutely amazing. Hands down, one of the best experiences I've ever had.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
I always get a little bit choked up when I hear this speech, and that doesn't happen to me very often. Kind of annoys me, the little reference to why does Rice play Texas, which I know why it was in there. He's a politician, and it made everybody celebrate the most important words. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And I think part of why I've been interested in space is just this concept of doing hard things just because they are hard things and they're worthy of doing. That's something that I have sought to do in my life through this. And it's pretty amazing what they were able to do through this.
The Mariner spacecraft, now on its way to Venus, is the most intricate instrument in the history of space science. The accuracy of that shot is comparable to firing a missile from Cape Canaveral and dropping it in this stadium between the 40-yard lines.
So I had to look this one up. The mention of the Mariner spacecraft, it was the first mission to go to Venus that was successful. It was in fact successful. It flew by in December, so a few months after the speech was given, and it was the first real flyby of another planet by a spacecraft from Earth that was working. We were able to collect in situ measurements of Venus and start to better understand this clouded planet. For the most part, most of the major milestones in space exploration have been that the United States really won the Martian exploration and the Soviet Union really run the Venus exploration. But for this very first mission, we, the United States, were able to do that. And I find this interesting and just how proud it was and how much of a difference this was than just a few years before.
Within these last 19 months, at least 45 satellites have circled the Earth. Some 40 of them were made in the United States of America, and they were far more sophisticated and supplied far more knowledge to the people of the world than those of the Soviet Union. Transit satellites are helping our ships at sea to steer a safer course. Tireless satellites have given us unprecedented warnings of hurricanes and storms, and will do the same for forest fires and icebergs.
I find this fascinating that, it's only a difference of 19 months between his original speech and this one. In fact, the 19 months is even referenced there. He talks about how many spacecraft have been launched. Vast majority of them were from the United States, only 5 from the Soviet Union, while there was 40 from the United States. We were exploring really the whole solar system, and we had the weather satellite that he had talked about and increased the budget for from Congress from the year before. Just imagine how important weather is to everyone, and the fact that they were able to image the hurricanes. It was already improving the shipping because they would know where these storms were and they could route around them. Just amazing how incredible that must have been to them in those days. It's absolutely astounding. Now, communication hadn't affected things, but it was coming. This kind of stuff has a very real implication in our lives today. Now, not everything that NASA has done has a direct consequence to you, but the pushing the boundaries of space exploration can and has had many real effects that help us in our daily lives. Anyways, thank you guys so much for everything. Let me know whatever questions or comments you guys have. Let me know what your favorite part of the speech was, and until next time, keep on trekking. Take care, guys. Thanks for everything.